Hi, this is Krista outside the Secret Yarnery. Today we are doing the Tammy Lethbridge Breast Cancer Awareness Sweater. It is a super easy sweater to make, very simple, made to your body measurements. Lots of different options. You can do the cuffs or just do it flat. You don't have to do the ribbing, and it's made for your body measurements. There's no joining under the arms. We're just doing decreases and working in a spiral. So it is super easy to do. It is great for larger arms because it has the dolman sleeves. Of course, it's a super sunny day. And it works up really, really quick. So let me tell you what we need to get started. I'm using this fabulous yarn from Ice Yarn, Ambient. It is 50% wool and 50% acrylic, 100 gram balls, 134 meters. It is the same weight and length as Landscape, but just with the wool content, Landscape from Lion Brand. But you're welcome to use any yarn that you want to. This is a size 5 for bulky, but it's on the thinner side of bulky. To be honest, it's more of a 4. But it's a really great yarn and it makes a beautiful finished project. Comes in a whole bunch of colors, but of course for Tammy's sweater, we are using this lovely blend with the hot pink. I will put a link to this yarn in the description box below. So what you're gonna need is your yarn. I have 3 packs or 12 balls of this yarn ready to go, but I'll put on the screen how many balls of yarn I used. You'll also be using a crochet hook. I'm using a 6mm for this yarn, a darning needle for later on, stitch marker, and a pair of scissors. So we're gonna wanna start by doing a chainless foundation. If you haven't done that before, I'll put a link up in the cards and the description box below of how to do chainless foundation. So we're just gonna start by making a slip knot and leave a long enough tail for you to sew in comfortably later on, so 5 or 6 inches. And make a slip knot any which way that you normally do. Shrink it down and put it on your hook. This sweater is made with just double crochets, so we're going to chain 4. So just grab your yarn and bring it through. 1, 2, 3, and 4. You don't count the knot at the bottom and you don't count what's on your hook. You can just count these V's going up or just one side of the loop. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So wrap your yarn and we're gonna go right into the very first chain. So right down in here, we're just gonna push our hook in. Doesn't matter where, just get your hook in there. Grab your yarn and bring it back. Hold underneath that chain, hold that stitch, pull your hook up a little bit. You want this stitch here at the end to be about the same length as your center loop. You want it to be a bit relaxed. So pull it up a little bit and then grab your yarn and chain 1. So just bring it through 1 loop. So there we did our chain. That's just gonna sit there. And now we're gonna pinch our chain. I'm just gonna pinch it right down in the center there. So 2 loops underneath my thumb and 1 in front. I'm just gonna pinch it like that so when I know where to go into later on. And now I'm gonna finish my double crochet. So wrap your yarn and take off 2, wrap your yarn and take off 2. So there's our chain and our double crochet done at the same time. I'm still holding open that first chain we made, or the first part of that stitch. So wrap your yarn and go right into where you're holding. 2 loops on your hook, grab your yarn and bring it through, pull it up, and chain 1. So wrap your yarn and take off 1 loop, pinch that one open, and do your double crochet. So wrap your yarn and take off 2, wrap your yarn and take off 2. So there's 2 double crochets, counts as 3 because of our chain 3 in the beginning, or our chain 4 really. Wrap your yarn, go back into where you're pinching, 2 loops on your hook, grab your yarn and bring it back, pull it up, chain 1 for your chain, and now double crochet. So wrap your yarn and take off 2, wrap your yarn and take off 2. So this is what it looks like in slow motion. fiddly to get started if you're just learning this technique. It can be a bit, you know, you feel like it's time consuming and super slow. But I'll show you why we want to do it this way. Is if you pull your work, you can see it stretches equally on both sides. Our chain isn't tighter than our stitches. Do you see what I mean? You want that because it's going to be our sweater on both sides, and you don't want a really tight side and a really loose side. You want it to be matching, which is why it's really good to kind of try this technique and get it down. If you want to just make a chain, you'll start the same way by making a slip knot, and you'll want to use a bigger hook. So don't use the same hook you'll be using for your sweater. This is half a size bigger. I would use one size bigger, a 7mm if I could. And then you're going to want to just do a chain. So I'll just do a bit of a chain. And when you're doing the chain, you don't want to correct. You don't want to pull up on your yarn. You don't want to go like whoop and make it tight again. You just want to be relaxed. I'll go back, put on my good hook, and now I'll work back into that chain. So I will chain 1 to start. Wrap my yarn and go into the second chain, which is this guy there. I'm not showing you actually how to do this like in detail because I'm assuming you can do double crochets into a chain before you start making a sweater. So there is I chained on this side, and these are my double crochets here. If you pull on it, there's not as much give on the chain side. The chain side is a bit tight. Whereas if you pull on this one, it pulls the same on both sides. If you want to do the chain, then my advice to you is go ahead and do it. Use a larger hook and try to be relaxed. Do a little bit like this, like just a few inches, and then give it a pull. And if it's still too tight where you've done your chain, go back and use a larger hook to do your chain and just be a bit more relaxed about it. You'll know that your chain or chainless foundation is long enough when you put it over your shoulder and it goes down where you want it to be. It's still going to go a little farther. Crochet will stretch. It'll still stretch a little bit just by wearing and stretching out. So that depends on how long or short you want to make your sweater. This is where you do it. Count your stitches, make sure it's an even number, write down whatever number that is for you, and just in case you want to make it shorter or longer in the future or make one exactly the same. To count your stitches, just wiggle your fingers between these posts, and remember your chain in the very beginning does count as a stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I'm going to chain 1. We're always going to turn with a chain 1. Turn your work, or kind of rotate your work a bit. We're going to be working into these stitches, working our way along. So our very first stitch, this is our chain on this side. Our very first stitch is right there. That's our first stitch. If you look up from the top, if you turn it to see the V's, you'll see our chain 1. There's our V for our chain 1, and here is our very first stitch. And each of these V's going back along is a stitch. Although when we're working into it, it'll look like this because we're working into the back of our work. So we're going to be going in to every stitch. So 1, 2, 3. They're kind of like these dimples. We're going to go right into the dimple. And when you go into the dimple and you tip it up, you automatically get those 2 loops on your hook. Dimple. And pick it up, you'll see 2 loops of that V automatically go onto your hook. So we're going to go straight into the very first dimple right here. 2 loops of that stitch on our hook. So we're going to wrap our yarn, put our hook in. If you tip it up, you'll see you have the 2 loops of the V on your hook. Grab your yarn and bring it back and make your double crochet. So wrap and take off 2, wrap and take off 2. Now we're going to make 1 double crochet into each stitch going back along this row. So 1 double crochet into each stitch, each dimple, getting those 2 loops of that stitch on your hook all the way back along this row. So just in case this is easier to see, these are the dimples. 1, 2, 3, these little kind of pockets at the top, that little hole. So we're just going to be going in, 2 loops of the stitch go onto your hook automatic just by going into that dimple. So right into the dimple, double crochet, 1 into each stitch all the way across, and I'll meet you when you get to the end of this row. When you get to the end of your row, just keep going. So this post here, that double crochet, we work right into the top of it. That's our last dimple. So we're going to go straight into that one and make a double crochet. And now that we started with a chain, so this one is different than how it's going to be in other rows. But this chain here, we're going to go into that, just that little stitch right next door. We're just going to put our hook right in there. 2 loops of that stitch on your hook. It doesn't matter how you get them on. Just literally wrap your yarn and go into that very next stitch or chain and make your last double crochet. If you want to count, you'll still have your 200 stitches or however many stitches you started off with. And we're going to do the same turn, and now we're doing this the whole way. Chain 1 and turn your work. And we're going to work into the same stitches again. We're still in dark to start with. But into the very first stitch, double crochet, second stitch, double crochet, and 1 double crochet into each of these dimples going all the way back along this row. So there we are. You can do your first double crochet, and then just to be sure, or we can actually do our first 2 double crochets, move over a smudge. So we've done 2 stitches. You can see there's 1 stitch and 2 stitches, so that's our first double crochet. We can put a stitch marker right into that stitch, and that is going to mark our first double crochet of that row, and when we come back we're going to need to work into that. See, if we put a stitch there, it pulls it up nice and straight. We're going to have a really nice clean edge along the bottom of our sweater. So now keep going, 1 double crochet into each stitch, and I'll meet you at the end of this row. Now we can see where we put our stitch marker. So that is going to be the last stitch of the row. So into the second to last double crochet and into the stitch marker, well, into the same stitch as the stitch marker, double crochet. And that is the end of the row. So that's the good thing about using a stitch marker. You can take it out. We will chain 1 and turn your work. Our first stitch is right here, right there. Second stitch, third stitch, fourth stitch. So wrap your yarn, go into the first stitch, double crochet. And you can put your stitch marker straight into that stitch, just underneath both strands of that V. And now keep going like this until your width is the right measurement, which I'll show you right now. Measure your body. You want to measure in the widest spot. So for me, it's my hips. If it is your chest area, measure your chest area. So you just want to be going around the biggest area. Hope you can see that. And then divide that number by 4. So for me, I'm going to say it's 40 inches. Your widest measurement around your body, divide by 4, 10 inches. So lay your piece down and fold it in half. You want the bottom edge to be lined up and just in half. And now we're going to do the really fun part. We're going to count our stitches. We want this to be exactly in half. Honestly, it doesn't totally matter. If you just want to wing it, that's also fine. But if you want to be totally sure, count your stitches and put your stitch marker in the halfway mark. So I did 160 stitches, so one side will be 80 and the other side will be 80. Like that. And now keep going, doing your double crochets until you reach that spot. So I have gotten into my stitch marker and I've made 80 of my double crochets on this row, and I've left 80 empty stitches. So now we're going to turn and go back. This is going to be at the back of your neck. So I have done 80 double crochets along this side, and I have 80 empty stitches going forward. So we're going to turn and go back. This is going to be the back of our neck. So we're going to chain 1, turn your work, and just go back as we normally do. So 1 double crochet into each stitch, and I'll meet you at the end of this row. So chain 1, turn, and come back. I will meet you at the end of this row. Make sure you go into your last stitch. And this finishes our neckline. Don't worry if you think it's too small. It's totally going to stretch and turn into a great neckline. Now we have to chain the same number of stitches to keep going. So we're going to build our chain. So now count your empty stitches just to make sure that you have the right number. What you want to make sure of is that your chain is going to have the same number of stitches as you do on the side that you've already finished. Count your stitches just to be sure. I have 80 stitches on the side I have completed, so I need to do 80 chains on my new side. So I'm going to take out my normal hook, my 6mm, and put in a hook one size larger. This is a 7mm. You want your chain to be nice and loose. Remember, we don't want it to be tight. So use a larger hook and chain loosely. If it's too loose, we can fix it. If it's too tight, your one side of your sweater won't lay flat along the front of your body, so it's quite important. So get your larger hook and chain sets of 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And put in a stitch marker. And chain 10 more. And 10, another stitch marker. So the stitch markers are just going to help you not have to count your chain, because nobody wants to count a chain. So now keep going until you have the same number of chains that you do stitches on this side. Don't compare the length, don't chain the same length, just chain your stitches the same number as you have over here. Stitch marker every set of 10, and I'll meet you when you have a long chain. We're going to put away our larger hook, put away our 7mm, and back to our regular hook. Now we're going to work our way back along our chain and do our double crochets. So to start your first double crochet, chain 1, and into the very first chain, right where your stitch marker is, go in and make a double crochet. There is 1 and 2. So there's our double crochet. Now I'm going to move this stitch marker up to that double crochet I just finished. So that's going to mark the end of my row, just to make sure I know where it is. And now 1 double crochet into each chain going back. And how you're going to see your chains, I just count these top loops. I don't look at the whole chain. I don't look at the entire V. I just look at this top loop. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to go into the next one right there, all the way along. I've already worked into this one. I can see my yarn is going into that stitch. So I'm not going into that one again. The next one is here. I'm going to go into that, and then I'm just looking for those top loops. And I'm just going into the top loop. I'm going to use these 2 strands, or the remaining part of the chain, when I work back to do our collar. So I'm not worried about going into 2 loops. I'm just going to go into the 1 loop and work my way down the chain like that, just looking for the loop. I'm not looking for the whole V, okay? So we're just looking at this 1 top loop. You want to make sure also that your chain isn't twisted. If it starts twisting like that, it can be confusing. Is that the next loop? Is this one? You don't really know. Make sure you have those pretty V's facing you, so it's laying flat in your hand, and just look for that top loop. But make sure, first of all, it's flat. Pretty side facing up, and this knobbly bit facing down. So this is our next stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down your chain. It's a good idea to also stretch your work and just make sure that your chain isn't too tight. If your chain's too tight, go back and make it loose. Make it like larger chains. You can also count your stitches to make sure, just to make sure you didn't miss any of these loops. So I'm going to keep my stitch markers in. I'm not taking them out just to make counting easier. And just keep going until you are finished this fiddly bit. Make your double crochets, 1 into every chain, and I'll meet you at the end of the chain. This is your first stitch of your regular double crochets. So you want to go into this stitch here, and you can go in either which way. You can go into the same loop for your chain, or you can go into the same way as you're going to be working into your stitches. It's up to you how you're going to do it. You're not going to see we're totally going around that entire collar area with another row of stitches, so it doesn't matter, whatever you're comfortable with. I'm going to go into the same way as I do for my chain, so just into that back loop only and do my double crochet. And now I'm going to go straight into my real stitches, so back into these dimples on the side I'm working into. I'm just going to be pushing my hook into those stitches, so the first one is there, just like always. So now we're back to easy peasy. So put your hook straight in and double crochet, and now we have connected. Keep going now back and forth. And now for your next rows, we're going to be going the same as always, right to the end of our row. And you're going to want to count your rows that you did on this side. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I did 17 rows, and then there is the neck area for 3 rows. So I want to do 17 rows on the other side. So this first row that we're just working on counts as a row. So this is row number 1, and do the same number of rows on the new side. So keep going until you have done the same number of rows on the side we're working on. So I've finished my 17 rows, or however many rows you did on your first side. I've done the same number on my second side, and I've put it on my mannequin. You're going to want to put it on yourself or whatever you're trying to fit to. If you hold the side together, it fits around your back side and to the center of your torso at the front. It's not too late to keep adding rows if it is not big enough yet. You can still go add 1 row and check, and add another row and check until it is the right size for you. And then we can always just add on to the other side when we do the sleeve. So as long as you're happy with how it fits around your body, we're ready to start the joining. So now your sweater looks like this, a funny U shape. We're gonna take the front flaps and just fold them down along the back piece. So the 2 short ones on top of the back. And now we're going to be joining where our yarn is still attached. We can take out our stitch markers from the chain if you haven't already. Those we can use now. And now get your corner situated where you have your yarn attached still. That's where we're going to be working. Now here we want to be a bit careful. I'm going to be fiddly about it. We need to count our stitches. And what we're going to do is we're going to leave 55 stitches along one side, so 110 stitches open to start our sleeve. So depending on your number, how long you made yours, you will be marking off, leaving 55 open or 110 on all the way around. So 55 on the front, 55 on the back, 110 in this area. So depending on what chain count you had in the beginning, you can just minus 55 from half of it. So if mine was 160, divide by 2, 80, so I have 80 stitches along the front. I need to leave 55 open, so I will count out 25 stitches down at the bottom. So leave 55 empty, but count from the bottom to make sure that it is 25. So to count your stitches, I just wiggle my fingers in between, and remember we had that chain 1 as a turn to help us chain, so our first double crochet is fatter. That is 1 double crochet at the end, and I just wiggle my fingers in between the posts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to 25, and put a stitch marker. And the stitch is right on top of the post. So if you just isolate your post with your fingers, just like this, you'll see that there's a stitch at the top, and that is the top of that stitch. And then just to be sure, I wiggle my fingers into both of them all the way along, because I want to make sure that it really is 25. Because we're doing join as you go, and we want to make sure that it's right. So I'm going to get my yarn back on my hook and just do my chain 1 and turn. So these are my stitch markers where my stitches line up, and I'm just going to flip it on top, just like that. When you're doing join as you go, working on a flat surface like a tabletop or a desk really does help. If you're working on your bed, lay it out flat on your bed and like work from above, because it's a bit tricky, and you want to just make sure that you can see where things are lined up and not miss anything. So a flat surface really, really helps. So I've done my chain 1. I'm going to do my first double crochet into that first stitch like we always have been. And you know how to do that by now, I'm sure of it. So double crochet. And now we need to find the first double crochet on this row above. And this row has our turning chain and our double crochet. So our stitch is right here on the corner. If you tip it up, you can also see your V's at the top. So there is a double crochet, and then the next one down is your double crochet, your first double crochet. So just take a look. You want to find the V on the corner and the one at the top of that double crochet, but it will look different because we did our chain 1 and double crochet into the same stitch. So just remember that's your one on the hill. Pick up those 2 strands from the hill. So lay it down flat again, just ignore it. And we're going to take our hook and just push it down into that stitch, and then pick it up. We want to just make sure we have 2 loops of that V on our hook, which we do. So the rest will be easy to do. We don't have to be that crazy, but to start out, we want to make sure we have a good joint and 2 loops of that stitch on our hook. Grab our yarn and bring it through. Turn your hook and slip stitch. And you want to be slip stitching like a small slip stitch. I'm holding my yarn here, there's tension on it. It's not a big loose slip stitch, it's kind of a tight, cute slip stitch. So now wrap your yarn, and we're going to go into the next stitch to make our double crochets. We're going to go into this stitch here and make our double crochet. And now we're going to tip your hook down so it's out of the way, and look in the top row, the row you're joining to, and you'll see our next stitch is right there. We've worked into the one before, so this is the next empty one. Just make sure you move your hook out of the way. If you keep your hook up, your hook will be hiding that stitch, and you'll just jump to the next one, and then your stitches won't line up. So hook down out of the way and into the very next stitch, and make a small little slip stitch. Like that. Double crochet into your next stitch down. Double crochet, hook down, and look for the next stitch above. It's this guy here. You can see we have yarn into this space. I wish it was a lighter color yarn for you to see, but we've worked into this space, this stitch. So now we're going to go into the next one without a stitch in it. So hook down, grab your yarn and bring it through, and slip stitch. Wrap your yarn, double crochet into the row we're working on. Hook down and out of the way, and we're going to slip stitch into the next stitch that does not have any yarn in it. You can see we've gone into this stitch. Now we're going to go into the next one. So hook in, grab your yarn and bring it back, and slip stitch. Double crochet into the row that we're working on. Hook down and look for that next empty stitch. Slip stitch to join. Double crochet into the row we're working on. Slip stitch into the next empty stitch. Just remember to move your hook out of the way every single time. Double crochet into the row we're working on, hook down, find the next stitch, this guy right here, slip stitch to join. Double crochet into the row close to you, hook down, find that empty stitch, slip stitch into the next stitch. slip stitch. Wrap your yarn, double crochet into the row closest to you, hook down and out of the way, find the next empty stitch, slip stitch. So we're doing a double crochet closest to us in the row we're working on, and a little slip stitch at the top of it. So in my head, I think of it as like a not capitalized letter I. So we're doing our I, and then we're putting the dot on top. The dot is your slip stitch, and you always want to dot your I's. So make your I, into the next stitch, slip stitch. And then we have a really nice flat join. It's stretchy. It has the same stretch as the rest of your sweater. Don't worry how our chain 1 kind of loops out here. It'll calm out. It'll calm itself down in the future. And now just keep working like this, making your I's and punctuating with a slip stitch, or making a double crochet with a slip stitch on top to join the 2 sides of your sweater front to back. So keep going like this, and I'll meet you when we get closer to those stitch markers. Now when you get close to your stitch markers, you can kind of start feeling like it's not lining up. Like I only have 2 stitches left here, and it looks like I have 3 down here, but my stitch marker is in the way. So just don't worry. Don't start thinking about it yet. Keep going to the very end. Don't look at it. Don't question yourself. Just literally keep going, doing your double crochet and your slip stitch on top all the way until you are working into the stitch with a stitch marker. And I'm leaving that stitch marker in there. I'm not even moving it. I'm just going to hold it to the side. And now I'm going to check, and I'm going in to the stitch with a stitch marker. So that is why we counted so carefully in the beginning. We counted like 3 times. Got to get it in there and not with a stitch marker. There we go. So there's my last double crochet into the stitch with a stitch marker and a slip stitch into the stitch with a stitch marker. So that is how we joined up the side of our sweater. That's finished. Now we are moving on to doing the sleeves. So wrap your yarn and 1 double crochet into each stitch going along the armhole. Just like regular, nothing new, nothing different. 1 double crochet all the way around this edge that is now our armhole, and I'll meet you when you get closer to our stitch markers. We have 2 stitches on each side of that join. So I'm going to put that second stitch marker up. So they're both in the same corresponding stitch, and we're going to do decreases when we get to this area. So if you are new to crochet, we're doing a decrease in the center, and we're doing a decrease before, 2 stitches before and 2 stitches after. So there is a stitch and a stitch. So we're going to start our decrease in the second stitch before the join. There's the first one after, the second one after. So we can put a stitch marker in that one as well. You don't have to put stitch markers if you are familiar with crochet and decreases, but if you are new to it, that can just kind of help ease your mind. So now keep going until we get to those stitch markers. And now I can take out that stitch marker because it'll kind of just be in our way. But into these next 2 stitches, we're going to start 2 double crochets. So into the first stitch, start your double crochet. So wrap your yarn and push your hook in, grab your yarn and bring it back, wrap your yarn and take off 2. Now you're going to stop. You're going to leave those on your hook, so 2 loops on your hook, and we're going to go ahead and start our second double crochet. So wrap your yarn, go into the next stitch, grab your yarn and bring it back, wrap your yarn and take off 2. So we started 2 double crochets. Now wrap your yarn and take off all 3 loops. So that is 2 double crochets that we started, and we finished into just 1 stitch. So that is a double crochet decrease. And now into the next 2 stitches, or both sides of that join, into these stitches here, right along that seam. You'll see there's a spot on each side of the join. We're going to start a double crochet into each of these spaces on either side of the join. So wrap your yarn, go into the first space, grab your yarn and bring it back, wrap your yarn and take off 2, leave that on your hook, Wrap your yarn, go into the next space on the other side of the join. Grab your yarn and bring it back. Wrap your yarn and take off 2. So we've started 2 double crochets, 3 loops on your hook. Wrap your yarn, turn your hook so the little hook side is facing down or to the bottom of your stitches, and slide off all 3 loops. So that's another double crochet decrease. So we've done 2 so far, and we'll do 1 more into the next 2 stitches. So take out your stitch marker. So wrap your yarn and into the next stitch, start your double crochet. So grab your yarn and bring it back. Wrap your yarn and take off 2. Leave that on your hook and start your second double crochet in the next stitch. So wrap your yarn and go in, grab your yarn and bring it back. Wrap your yarn and take off 2. So 3 loops on your hook. Wrap your yarn and take off all 3 loops. So that is now 3 double crochet decreases. We started 6 double crochets and we ended up 3 stitches along the top. So that is how we decrease underneath the arm. 1 double crochet into each stitch, and I will meet you when we get back. So getting back on our second round, we want to do decreases in the same area as we did before. And there's a bit of a trick to it so that your seam stays underneath your underarm and doesn't kind of crawl out on an angle. So what you need to start doing is identify your 3 decreases in the row below. So there's our 3 decreases. They're just these little, like a triangle, like little points. And put a stitch marker in the top of each of those. You don't have to do this every round. This is just me showing you where your stitches are. So those are your 3 decreases in the round below. And you're going to start decreasing 1 stitch before that. So you're going to start with the green 1 stitch before, and the 2 stitches after, because we need a total of 6 stitches for our decreases every single round. So this is how we are going to do it every round. This is going to help keep your decreases all directly underneath your arm and not kind of start creeping out to the side like crochet joins like to do. So you're going to start 1 post before and all the decreases from the below, and 2 stitches afterwards. So that is how it's going to look. Your 3 decreases, you're going to start 1 post before, and you're going to do 1 brand new decrease after. And you don't have to use stitch markers. I'm just trying to show you where your stitches are. So coming along to that stitch marker, go like regular until you get to the exact stitch with the stitch marker. And into that stitch, we're going to start our decrease. So start your double crochet into the same stitch as your stitch marker, or 1 stitch before your decreases down below. Start your next double crochet and finish them together. So there's our first decrease. So start your next double crochet in the next stitch, leave it on your hook. Start your next double crochet in the next stitch, leave it on your hook, and finish both stitches together. We have to do that 1 more time. So you notice we've gone over our decreases, and now we have to do a decrease in these last 2 stitches that are all by themselves. So decrease the next 2, so start a double crochet in 1 stitch and start a double crochet in the next stitch. Wrap your yarn and finish those stitches together. So that's your last decrease, and just go for a stitch or 2 before we start and stare and look at it. There we are. And now if you want to move this stitch marker up, you're welcome to. Just pop it in to the first stitch before your decreases. So you can see your decreases there, 1, 2, and 3, and the stitch before. Let's pop a stitch marker right in there, and now you just keep going around and start your decreases when you get to your stitch marker. 3 decreases per round, always starting 1 stitch before your 3 decreases in the round below, and keep going until your sleeve is about 4 inches wide. When your sleeve gets down to about 4 inches, 4.5 inches, somewhere in there, or in centimeters, 11 or 12 centimeters, that is about when we're going to start and make our cuff. If you have bigger hands or bigger wrists, you can stop sooner. But let me just show you. This is what our sleeve is looking like now. So it has a nice dip on the underarm side, and we are just going to get rid of that now. So there's the 3 decreases we did, 1, 2, and 3. So into the decreases, we're going to do something different. So crochet, double crochets all the way until you get to your decreases. Into your decreases, we're going to do 1 treble crochet in each. So wrap your yarn twice and into the stitch, 1 treble crochet. So to do a treble crochet, you wrap your yarn twice, go into the next stitch, bring your yarn back, wrap your yarn and take off 2, wrap your yarn and take off 2, wrap your yarn and take off 2. So that is a triple takeoff or a treble crochet. Wrap your yarn twice and 1 more into the last decrease down below. 1 treble crochet. Into the next stitch, wrap your yarn, 1 double crochet. Into the next stitch, wrap your yarn and 1 half double crochet. So wrap your yarn and go into the stitch, grab your yarn and bring it back, wrap your yarn and take off all 3 loops at once. So that's a half double crochet. Into the next stitch, single crochet. So no wrapping your yarn, go in and bring your yarn back, wrap your yarn and take off 2. And into the last stitch here, the next stitch over, we're just going to do a slip stitch. So go in, bring your yarn back, turn your hook and bring your hook through. Now if you look at our sleeve, it's quite evened out. It's still a bit not perfect, but it will be in the next few rounds. Even the next round, it'll be nice and straight. If you don't want to do the ribbed cuff, you can just keep going with double crochets, no decreasing. Just keep building it out a little bit and that'll just be a nice plain flat cuff. Also a good way to do it if you are kind of running out of yarn, because building a rib cuff kind of eats a bit more yarn than just doing regular double crochet. So this depends on how much yarn you have left and if you want to do it or not. So to start our cuff, we're just going to do 1 row of regular double crochet. So we're going to chain 1 and into the very same stitch, 1 double crochet. So just into the same stitch, 1 double crochet. Put a stitch marker into the top of that stitch so you can see it when we're coming around, just in case. And 1 double crochet into each stitch. So no increases, no decreases, just 1 double crochet into each stitch. And I'll meet you when we get back to our stitch marker. There's our last stitch. And we put our stitch marker in so we know where to slip stitch to, just that little spot. So you can even leave your stitch marker in and just push your hook into the same spot and slip stitch to join. Take out your stitch marker. And now what you can do is keep doing the same thing if you don't want to do a ribbed sleeve or a ribbed cuff. If you do want to do a ribbed cuff, then we're going to do front post, back post. If you don't want to, or you don't have too much yarn, or you're worried about how much yarn, you could just keep going like this until your sleeve is the length that you are comfortable with or that you want it to be. So we are going to start doing our front post. So I'm going to chain 1, and this chain I'm going to kind of bring it up a little bit. I want some space on it. So give yourself a little bit of extra space, and we're going to be going right beside this post, so after the chain 1 and before the post, just because we might need this chain 1 to even out our stitches when we get to the other side, or else we can just ignore it. So wrap your yarn, we're going to go right in before that post and out the other side. Grab your yarn and bring it back, and now we're going to do our double crochet. So that was a front post double crochet, and you can see it's lining up nice on the front. And now to do a back post, we're going to come from the back side and over top of the next post and back down to the other side. So it's the same but opposite. So wrap your yarn, and I just kind of hold it with my finger so I know where that space is. Put my hook in, open up a space on the other side, and push my hook back down. Grab my yarn and bring it through. And this takes a bit of it's a bit fiddly in the beginning. And then double crochet, like that. Wrap your yarn, front post, so in from the front post double crochet, and wrap your yarn, back post double crochet, so in from the back, and double crochet. So we're just going to alternate making front post double crochet and back post double crochet all the way along the cuff until we get to where we started. So take your time, especially with those back posts. They can be a pain in the butt just to get your yarn through. So don't think you're the only one. That's normal, but you'll get the hang of it. And then you'll be doing them all the time. So keep going and I'll meet you when we get to where we started. So I have gotten around my cuff, and this is why we left out that little chain. So I've done a front post, I did a back post. So this is gonna be front post, and my first one is front post. So depending how yours works out, I'm just gonna use that little chain as a stitch. So wrap your yarn and front post into the next one. And I'm gonna just go around this little chain here. So it's gonna be a back post, just a little one. And this just depends on your own stitch count, but I'm gonna go around that little chain just to even out my pattern, and it's a total cheat and you can use that also. So there is a little back post stitch. So now that's all evened out, front, back, and I'm going to slip stitch to the top of this first front post, just like that. So a little slip stitch, and a chain one, and a front post. So to do a front post, and now I'm gonna go around this whole thing here. I'm going around that entire loopy bit. It's kind of sitting on the front. I'm gonna go underneath the whole thing, just like that. So now the front posts are super easy because they're just sitting there for you. And a back post, well, they're still awkward. They're a little easier though. So just around that back post. So front and back, and I'll meet you when we get back to here. There's my last back post. So just around the back post. And now slip stitch to join. So I'm gonna slip stitch to join, chain one. And now I wanna show you this first front post, because now we're going to be going around that chain as well. So we're going to be going around the whole thing. So this first front post, it's a bit different because it's bigger, but we're going to just go into that big space right before and around the whole thing. So that's what we're going to do when we do the join and step up. And now just keep going doing the same thing until your cuff is as long as you want it to be. So my cuff is as long as I want it to be. I've done my last back post double crochet, ready to connect to the top of that front post. So instead of doing a regular slip stitch, we'll do an invisible join. So cut your yarn. You want to leave enough to work with, maybe about 8 inches or 6 inches. And we're going to pull it up and through that stitch, like that. Take your darning needle and thread your needle. And now looking at our work, we'd normally be slip stitching right into the top of that front post double crochet, 2 loops of it on our hook. So we're gonna do the same thing with our needle. We're just gonna go straight under, 2 loops of that stitch on your hook, and you wanna make sure you're going under the stitches, not into any of the yarn. And pull your tail through. And keep an eye on where it's coming from. You see this strand that we're sewing, it's coming in from this stitch right there. So make it snug it up, not too snug. You still want it to look a bit like a stitch, but pull it on over and now go back down into that first stitch, like that. And see how we've made a V. That's our join. This is our first front post double crochet. That's our last back post double crochet. And this is our cute little join in the middle. Now we're just going to sew in our tail. So just go down into your work. And if you're using a color changing yarn, see if you can kind of keep your yarn in your same colorway. I don't want to take my dark yarn and weave it in the hot pink area. I just want to kind of keep it up with the colors that it matches. And you also don't want to be sewing in to any of these pretty V's at the top. You want to leave all of those alone. So just kind of poke about underneath, back and forth, up and down, one direction, back in the other direction, and that will help your tail not wiggle out later. There we go. And then just snip off your tail. And that is your invisible join cuff. Cute, right? So sweet. When you think your sleeve is getting long enough, fold it nicely so that your pretty join, those nice stitches, are laying along each other, and line up that very first join or your very first sleeve row. If you just pinch it to make sure that that underarm seam right where the sleeve starts and the join finishes, you can just line up each of those colors or each of the rows and make sure that they line up all the way along. Or of course you can count each row, also fine. But these double crochets, these rows are big enough where you can just kind of see, oh wow, they're almost matching. It's lucky. So that's how you make sure your sleeves are the right length. So finish that all up and I'll meet you for the collar. Start the collar. We are going to push our hook right into this very first double crochet that we made. It is a bit different because of course there's a chain 1 on the side that I am joining to. Yours might look different, that's fine. We're just going to pick that very first stitch on the edge, on the corner, and get 2 loops of that V on our hook. So push your hook in, loop of yarn on your hook, leave a long enough tail to weave in about 6 inches or so. Pull it through and slip stitch with both to join. Drop your tail, just hold it along the top of your work for a few stitches and chain 2, 1 and 2. Our slip stitch counts as our first chain, and that is going to count as our first double crochet into that stitch. So now wrap your yarn and go into the very same stitch again, the same spot, and make 1 more double crochet. We want to start and end with 2 double crochets for this round. Into the next stitch, 1 double crochet, and into the next stitch, 2 double crochets. So we're alternating 1 double crochet and 2 double crochets. So there's an increase every other stitch all the way along this row. We're working over our tail for a couple stitches, and then maybe I'll do 1 more and drop my tail. So here's my last one. There's 1 double crochet. I'm going to drop my tail and 2 double crochets into the next stitch. 1 and 2. So we're going to work along our collar like that, doing 2 double crochets, 1 double crochet, 2 double crochets, 1 double crochet, 2 double crochets, 1 double crochet, all the way up along our work, and I'll meet you at the neck. So that is the last stitch of the row. Now we're kind of going to rotate so we can work along these 3 rows along the back of our neck. And into these stitches, we want to do increases also. So the very next spot we can make a stitch is just here. We're going to put 2 double crochets here, and 2 double crochets into the chain, and 2 double crochets into the stitch, into the other side of that stitch. We're just all the way along, we're going to be putting 2 double crochets. So into this next spot down here, 2 double crochets, and into the chain. This is our first row at the back of the neck, so I want to get right into there. I'm just going to push my hook in, 2 loops on my hook, and make 2 double crochets, 1 and 2. Into this next space, 2 double crochets, 1 and 2. Into the chain somehow, 2 loops on our hook, 2 double crochets, 1 and 2. into the stitch, 2 double crochets, 1 and 2, and into this chain. Push your hook in somehow, 2 loops of that stitch on your hook, 2 double crochets, 1 and 2. So we're going to go ahead and put 2 double crochets into this stitch as well. Even though we've worked into it with our next row, the neckline, we're going to just increase into there to give ourselves some extra stitches around our neck. So 2 double crochets into that stitch. Now we're going to finish this row, 1 double crochet into the next, 2 into the next stitch. So alternating, doing 2 double crochets and 1 double crochet all the way down this row until we get to the end of our sweater. And into the last one, into on the hill, 2 double crochets, 1 and 2. So that has finished our row. There's a lot of stitches in there, but don't worry about it, that's what we want. Chain 1 and turn your work. Now we are going to start with front post, back post, alternating all the way along. So wrap your yarn, and I'm going to start with front post because I like it better. So we're just going to go around that post we just made. So wrap your yarn around the post and front post double crochet, same as the cuff. And now a back post double crochet. Wrap your yarn and back post for the next one, so in from behind. And I also just post, see how I'm pinching my work? Feel free to like move yourself around. You don't have to be stuck in one place. And back post double crochet. Next one, I separate it with my finger so I know which post I'm doing, and front post. So keep working, making front posts and back posts all the way along, and I will meet you when we get to the end of this row. At the end of the row, don't forget your chain. That counts as either your front post or back post. For me, it is back post, so I'm just going to go around and do my back post like so. And to turn your work, we're just going to do a chain 1 and turn our work and just do regular. So now we can see front post is front post, the one in front. So I'll do a front post now to start my row. And keep going. So we're just going to keep doing this until your collar is the size you want it to be, or you run out of yarn. So keep going, and I'll see you when it's finished. When your collar is the size you want it to be, or you have run out of yarn, just at the end of your row, finish like you normally do. And then chain 1, cut your yarn, pull your hook up and your yarn through, and snug that down to secure. Now we just have to sew in our tail and we're finished. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Love to see your sweater.